The next morning, Han Sen was on the train going to the teleport station, with many passengers sharing his destination. Most people could not afford a teleport device, so they had to enter God's sanctuary using a public teleport station. Today, the conductor seemed to be in a bad mood. While Han Sen was deep in thought about what to do in God's sanctuary, a violent shake of the train left everyone who was standing falling to the sides. Since he wasn't paying attention, Han Sen also involuntarily staggered a few steps forward and fell on something soft, subconsciously wanting to seize something to regain his balance. He felt strange because what he was holding on to was even more soft and tender. Then he found that he had bumped into a woman in military uniform, and his hands were on her chest. Bastard. The woman scowled and elbowed him fast and hard. If she were to succeed, Han Sen would have lost half his face. He subconsciously raised an arm to block the hit, felt a strong hit on his arm, and involuntarily stepped back several steps. The woman turned around and viciously stared at Han Sen. She exclaimed with just one look, "You ass, King Xuan." She didn't finish her sentence, but Han Sen cried in fear. This woman in uniform happened to be the woman from whom he had gotten the nickname Ass Freak. Han Sen did not expect King Xuan also to be on Roka planet, and it seemed that she had enlisted in the army. Being in the military was nothing uncommon in the Alliance, as all legitimate residents of the Alliance needed to serve at least 5 years when they turned 20. When Han Sen turned 20, he would also become a soldier if there were no special reason for him not to serve. King Xuan recognized Han Sen, but didn't initiate a fight. She just looked at him with a cold and slightly disgusted look. Han Sen thought ruefully, she must think I'm a pervert now. I don't even blame her. I did stab her in the bottom, and now, if I were her, I'd assume the same. There are so many planets in the Alliance. How is King Xuan here as well? And what are the chances that I would meet her and did this to her? Han Sen thought plaintively. There was no way around it. He would have to let the situation play itself out. In the Alliance, wounding others was not allowed. King Xuan did not want to make a scene, so she just glowered at him and didn't move further. Han Sen had goosebumps from her staring and immediately got off the train once he reached the teleport station. To his surprise, King Xuan followed behind him. Dogs can't help from eating SHT. I thought you were just innocent, while you are by nature a disgusting person. King Xuan said fiercely. You saw what happened. It was the train, and so many others also fell. It was just a coincidence, Han Sen said with a wry smile. Would you believe that if you were me? You think I'll just send you to the police? It's not that easy. I can't beat you up here, but in God's sanctuary, it will be a different story. You are going there, right? I'll wait for you. King Xuan immediately left and the soldiers saluted her. Good morning, station master. Han Sen stumbled and couldn't believe what he saw. He almost wanted to cry. All teleport stations belong to the military system. A garrison was assigned to each station, and the station master was the garrison's chief executive. Han Sen had heard that the old station master was to be transferred, and he couldn't believe that King Xuan would be the new station master, not even in his wildest dreams. Han Sen had a bad feeling about the whole thing. As the station master, King Xuan would know his whereabouts very well, and it wasn't even possible for him to use a different teleport station. There are 3 public teleport stations on planet Roka, but the other 2 were too far away, and he couldn't waste 2 days on traveling. Han Sen entered God's sanctuary when King Xuan went to her office. He decided to wait until she left the shelter before he teleported back home. Han Sen gave King Xuan no chance to intercept him. Taking some meat jerky made from the mutant scorpion, Han Sen left steel armor shelter. Did I use up my luck when I found the black crystal? Han Sen thought, depressed. He did not go far before seeing Son of Heaven and his gang standing outside the shelter chatting. Han Sen wasn't interested in meeting up with them and went the other way. However, Luo Tianyang called him from behind. Ass freak, come here. Reluctantly, Han Sen had to turn around toward Luo Tianyang, perplexed. I'm calling you. Come here and you'll get lucky. Luo Tianyang waved to him, smiling maliciously. There is no need. I'm not strong. I can only deal with ordinary creatures and can't even fight primitive creatures. I am afraid I cannot help you. Han Sen knew it was never good when Luo Tianyang called him. Cut the crap. Do you want a beating? I said come. Luo Tianyang gazed at Han Sen with his face dark. In addition to Han Sen, Son of Heaven and his gang were also joined by a few thugs they paid to come along. The group left steel armor shelter and marched into the mountains. Although they expected nothing good to happen, they still wanted to take the chance for the sake of the generous reward. In the past, if Han Sen had not been blocked by King Xuan and Son of Heaven, he might also have risked his life for the bounty. Now Han Sen had no reason to take such risks, but it was clear that Son of Heaven and Luo Tianyang wanted to use him as a stepping stone. which made him want to kill them both. Han-sen quietly followed them, guessing what they were about to do. When recruiting people, the gang had said they were hunting a mutant creature, and it was only because there were also many ordinary and primitive creatures that they needed more hands. Han-sen of course couldn't take this seriously. To kill a mutant creature, the regular gang was more than enough. The dozen people around Son of Heaven could all kill a mutant creature on their own, let alone Son of Heaven himself. The extra hands were completely unnecessary, according to their story. Luo Tenyang and others casually killed the creatures they encountered along the way, and gave the meat to the hired people casually, which made everyone quite happy. The group had been going for 6 or 7 days, and the gang still had no intention of stopping. On the 8th day, they halted at a mountain pass. Very far from the shelter, there was no human activity. They encountered many different creatures. Son of Heaven and his gang had killed a lot of primitive animals on the way, and kept some of the flesh as food. It seems that we are almost there. What on earth are they up to? Han-sen had not heard anything, but judging from the grave look on their faces, this couldn't be a simple operation. They rested for a day at the campsite and crossed the mountain pass the next morning. After hiking a dozen miles, they saw a gap in the canyon so deep and dark that no one could see the bottom. Everyone lit a torch. The gang sent the hired people as the vanguard and followed them into the gap. The hired ones all knew it was time to put their life on the line, so they were dawdling. "Why are you going so slowly, bitches? Do you still want the rest of the money?" Luo Tenyang whipped a few people in the back and shouted. The thugs could only speed up going down. Han-sen was among them. It was not too difficult to walk down, and nothing happened along the way until they reached the bottom. The thugs were relieved and started to talk and laugh again. It was very dark at the bottom of the gap, and the group had to rely on the torches. There was an underground river running through the huge space. Cross the river and go into the cave on the other side. Luo Tenyang pointed his whip to the other side. "Luo, I cannot swim. This river is too wide," said a young man who had been recruited. "Who told you to swim? We have inflatable boats. Just row across." Luo Tenyang opened the parcel on the back of his mount, and there were indeed inflatable boats in there. After they inflated the boats, each one could sit 4 to 5 people. The group started to row the boats across. The speed of the water was not fast, and there was no risk of being rushed downstream. 2 boats soon reached the center of the river. All of a sudden, with a splash, a dark creature emerged from the water with half of its python-like body exposed. Its body was wider than a bucket and covered with shiny black fine scales. Its mouth was so large that it could fit a cow. But it wasn't a cow that was swallowed, rather someone on the boat. The giant body then put its full weight on the boat, which exploded with everyone on it falling into the water. Everyone was shocked and trying to row the boats back. Those who hadn't gone on the boat just dropped their boat and started to run back. With a glint of cold steel, the 2 running the fastest were beheaded by Luo Tenyang and another gang member. Luo Tenyang pointed the knife with blood on it at the rest and cried ruthlessly, "There is but one monster, so whoever reaches the other side can live. And I'll kill anyone who took the money and tries to run away. To live or to die, it is up to you." Everyone was intimidated by Luo Tenyang's vicious act and started to row towards the other side. "Assholes, you just want to feed the monster with humans," Han-sen cursed in his heart. Those who fell into the water before were trying to swim to the other side but were suddenly pulled into the water by something. It was so dark that no one saw what happened to them, but their fate could be imagined from the thick scent of blood. The hired boys dared not move forward, and Luo Tenyang used his knife again to force them. They didn't want to stay in the river, so they had to row hard. Han-sen lit the surroundings with his torch while rowing the boat. In case the monster came out of the water, he had to summon Sacred Blood Beast soul armor at once to save his life. The monster again collapsed a boat, and everyone on it was screaming. Then what could be heard was only the waves rolling. "Row harder if you want to live," Han-sen yelled at the 2 on the boat with him who were petrified as he was rowing his heart out. "King heartless bastards," he swore quietly. The 2 men were revived by Han-sen's shout and started to row desperately. From time to time there were screams and splashes. Countless men must have been buried in the snake belly. There was no doubt that this giant snake was a sacred blood creature. Aquatic creatures were hard enough to kill, let alone a sacred blood creature. With his normal gang, Son of Heaven didn't even dare to hunt it, but was only trying to fill out the group, so that they could safely reach the other side. Han-sen took a look at the other side as he was rowing. After they passed the middle of the river, the torch could light up the other side a little bit. Since Han-sen had started to practice jade skin, his body function seemed to get a lot better. Vision was also a lot stronger than before, and he seemed to have gained night vision as well. Now he could clearly see a cave 6 to 9 feet wide on a cliff. Although there was no path, the cave must have been the gang's destination. Han Sen was looking at the cave when he heard a loud splash. His heart sank as he saw the giant snake popping out of water less than 6 feet from their boat, its mouth moving towards the boat and its fangs showing. Without thinking, Han Sen jumped into the water and summoned his armor underwater. Like a fish, he struggled to swim across the river. The whole process of crossing the river was tragic. It wasn't clear whether the black snake was insatiable or just determined to kill humans. But only 2 boats reached the other side, and only 7 people lived. All the others were in the water and most likely dead. The snake didn't show up again. Son of Heaven. Although the snake was a sacred blood creature, it was not intelligent. Now it is full. We should not have too much risk crossing, said Luo Tanyang, smiling. Go over. Son of Heaven gave the order, and the gang went over in 3 boats. As expected, the snake didn't attack anymore and they all landed safely. Luo Tanyang whipped the 7 survivors, who were forced to walk inside the cave, trembling. They regretted so much that they had coveted the bounty. What was money good for if they died here? But they did not encounter any other creatures along the way. In half an hour, they reached the end of the cave. At the end of the cave there was a pool, and next to the pool was a gravel nest 30 feet wide. In the middle of the nest there lay 2 eggs the size of ostrich eggs with black patterns. Son of Heaven was overjoyed. Haha, awesome. Eggs of sacred blood creatures, and there are 2 of them. Now my sacred Geno points could go over 80. Even so, he did not lose his caution and winked at Luo Tanyang, who was equally excited. The latter understood immediately and forced the survivors to fetch the eggs. Trembling, they walked into the gravel nest and carried out the 2 eggs. However, before they were able to leave the nest, the pool started to bubble, and bang. A huge snake head stuck out, the dark red snake eyes staring at the egg thieves. Damn, throw the eggs over, Son of Heaven shouted to them. But they were dumbfounded by the snake up close and did not reply him. Useless mother of hash curs. Son of Heaven scolded and summoned his red sword, running forward. The gang all summoned their weapons and followed him. Rushing in front of the survivors, Son of Heaven grabbed the eggs and ran towards the mouth of the cave. The snake was originally concerned about its eggs and didn't move. Seeing Son of Heaven running away with them, it went into a rage and left the pool, chasing the gang madly. Block it, cried Son of Heaven, while he kept running without pause. Luo Tanyang was even more ruthless. He grabbed 2 shivering survivors and threw them at the snake. Catching one in the mouth, the snake swallowed him without chewing. The rest of the gang all followed suit, using the survivors as human shields, which temporarily resisted the snake's attack. They took advantage of it and retreated. Son of Heaven ran fast, holding the 2 snake eggs. It took him no time to arrive at the mouth of the cave. When he was excited, a golden fist appeared in front of him and hit him on the face. He hadn't expected someone hiding behind the cave mouth and was unprepared for the attack. Blood spilling and nose crooked, he fell back with his hand covering his face. The 2 snake eggs suddenly flew out from his arms. A golden figure jumped up, caught 1 egg with each hand, and ran toward the river. Son of Heaven fell to the ground, clutching his face. He immediately managed to climb up, saw the unique golden armor and recognized who it was. After jumping in the water, Han Sen had swiftly swum to the shore in the chaos. Han Sen reached the river and suddenly saw waves roaring. A huge black-scaled snake appeared from the river. F-K. There is another one. Han Sen looked back and saw the other snake chasing the gang. You are so F-Ked. Son of Heaven hated Dollar's guts and gloated that he was stopped by the snake. Han Sen quickly had an idea as the snake in the river glared at him. He pushed hard with his right hand secretly, and then threw the snake egg at Son of Heaven. Catch, we will each keep 1 egg, and let's deal with the snakes together first. Who agreed to that? I will get both eggs and kill you. Thinking Han Sen was terrified, Son of Heaven sneered and caught the egg. But the egg broke when it hit him and the egg was all over him. Son of Heaven was stunned. Roar. The giant snake shrieked and rushed madly towards Son of Heaven, who was covered in egg, leaving Han Sen alone. Han Sen turned and ran with the remaining snake egg. Jumping on an inflatable boat, he desperately rowed to the other side without looking back. He still had an egg with him, and if both snakes decided to go for him, it would be no fun at all. F-K-your. Han Sen heard cursing from behind, followed by all sorts of human voices, and the beast's roar. Han Sen went to the other side, jumped onto the shore and ran out of the big gap. Without a pause, he ran toward the shelter. After running for a while, Han Sen started to get uneasy. In case Son of Heaven and his gang escaped, they would definitely go for him, and he could by no means outrun their mounts. Han Sen decided to go into the forest and take a detour so that he didn't risk being caught by them. They had been in the shelter for years, and everyone was fit and had plenty of beast souls. Even though they were no match for the snakes, surely some of them could get away. It was best to be careful. That night, Hansen found a corner to take shelter from the wind and got some firewood. Sealing the snake egg with a layer of mud, he put it on the fire and barbecued it. Young obsidian dragon killed. No beast soul gained. Eat it to gain 0 to 10 sacred Geno points randomly. Having barbecued it for a while, Hansen heard the voice, so it was not a snake. Unfortunately, I didn't gain the beast's soul, Hansen thought greedily. Soon the egg was cooked and Hansen used a stick to get the egg out of the fire. Breaking the burnt mud crust on the outside, he saw the delicious egg white. Hansen took a bite, and the egg was so much better than a chicken egg. Young obsidian dragon eaten. 1 sacred Geno point gained. Hansen ate the whole egg and was so full he couldn't move. He had gained 5 sacred Geno points. Adding the 8 points he already had, Hansen now had 13 sacred Geno points. It took Hansen 8 or 9 days to reach Steel Armor Shelter. Son of Heaven and his gang had been back for 2 days already when he arrived. There were only 8 in the gang that returned alive, and everyone was injured. Even some of Son of Heaven's henchmen had died. Son of Heaven wouldn't say what they had done, and King Xuan and Fist Guy failed to find out. Several hired thugs, however, had come back alive after they had fallen into the water, and through them, King Xuan and Fist Guy eventually learned what had happened. They still had no idea what had happened after the hired men fell into the water, so just took for granted that the gang was hurt by the obsidian dragons. Their guess was only half right, because the egg thrown by Hansen also contributed a lot to the gang's predicament. After all, they wouldn't have had to fight the dragons if he hadn't done that. Son of Heaven was afraid of being ridiculed, and did not tell what happened later, while secretly he launched a new search for Dollar. It is a pity that Son of Heaven and Luo Tenyong didn't die. Hansen learned what had happened and felt relieved. He was afraid that Son of Heaven might suspect something, seeing he had returned alone. Now that there were other survivors, Hansen naturally had nothing to worry about, and caught a primitive copper-toothed beast on his way back to the shelter. If Son of Heaven and his gang came to interrogate him, he could just say he was rushed downstream and got lucky. Hansen was thinking too much, because Son of Heaven did not have the time to ask him and didn't make the connection at all. More than half a month was spent on the expedition. Hansen teleported out of God's sanctuary to see his mother and sister. However, at the gate of the transport station, King Xuan was standing at the exit, looking at him coldly. "You sure can hide. It's been more than half a month since I saw you. Do you think I'll spare you from the punishment you deserve? Miss Qin, what do you want?" Hansen looked at her, depressed. King Xuan was now the station master, and there was no way to bypass her. "Easy, take this and come with me." King Xuan threw a combat suit at Hansen. "You would not kill me anyway," Hansen thought, taking the combat suit and following her back to the station. They didn't teleport to God's sanctuary but to the combat room in the station. Hansen put on the combat suit and entered the room, where King Xuan stood in a red combat suit with black stripes. The combat suit was not just clothing, but a high-tech product that could function as armor, with inbuilt sensors which recorded all data during fighting, including heart rate, breathing, punch speed, and the impact taken. This allowed the users to understand their physical status and determine their future practice methods. "If you win, I will leave you alone for good." King Xuan curled her finger, indicating Hansen should attack. "You are about to max out on sacred Geno points and have so many beast souls. I just graduated, and you have trained in the army for so long. Why don't you just say you want to kill me?" Even if Hansen could win, he didn't want to expose the fact that he was Dollar, and he wasn't confident about the fight. "No beast soul allowed. And we are clear if you can still stand after 50 movements," King Xuan said casually. "Deal." Hansen believed he could endure 50 movements if he focused on defense. King Xuan had made up her mind to kick Hansen's ass. The first time, when Hansen stabbed her in the rear, she could attribute it to his ignorance, while the harassment on the train couldn't be a coincidence. Having identified Hansen as a freak and bastard, King Xuan walked up to him with anger in her eyes and said, "You start." Bang! Hansen punched her in the face. Clutching her nose and stepping back, King Xuan stared at him, not believing what had happened. Hansen was not like any man she had seen. She let him start and he just immediately punched her, which was completely beyond her expectations. That's why she was not prepared for it. They were standing close to each other, so she was hit on the nose. In her understanding, in a showdown, the two opponents should go to the middle and take their positions. And men always acted as gentlemen in front of her. Even if they were weaker, they'd still want to show their masculinity. No one was like Hansen, who threw a punch without a sign, hitting her face where she wasn't even covered by protective gear. "I'm sorry, so sorry. Have we not started?" Hansen repeatedly apologized. He thought he'd let her beat him to let out the anger, and wanted it to end sooner. He didn't expect that he could hit her nose, which soon turned red. We had started, and will continue, you. Bang. King Shuan had more to say, but he acted hearing continue and hit her on the nose again. She was in so much pain she had to squat on the floor. You said continue, so I thought. Han Sen quickly explained. I'll kill you. King Shuan jumped from the ground. Not caring about the rules anymore, she moved forward and started to beat Han Sen up. Resisting King Shuan's beating, Han Sen found his fighting skills were much weaker than King Shuan's, and he couldn't even play defense. He barely got through a dozen punches and was beaten down. Weigh less than 50. See you next time. King Shuan turned away, leaving behind Han Sen, who was wounded all over. Han Sen stood up with a wry smile on his face. Wearing a combat suit, he wasn't injured seriously. It was just some pain he would have to put up with. The worst part was he seemed to have enraged King Shuan even more. After Han Sen left the station to return home, King Shuan took a shower and was about to delete the video and data of the fight right away. She was the station master and the strongest woman in Steel Armor Sanctuary. There was no way she'd let people see the video of herself being punched in the nose by Ass Freak. Before deletion, King Shuan watched it again, and she was momentarily shocked. She thought that the reason she was hit was that Han Sen took advantage when she wasn't prepared. After carefully reviewing it several times, King Shuan suddenly found that although this was a very important reason, it couldn't fully explain her being hit. Was it? Thought King Shuan, and repeatedly watched the part when he hit her and compared the data collected by the combat suit. So, his fist fighting skills are really poor, just about the normal level of a compulsory education graduate. But his movements were explosive and unexpected. King Shuan mumbled as she was checking the data, and there was something about him, like a killer. Before he made a move, I could not predict his intention, and that had left me unguarded. When he threw a punch, there wasn't even the slightest change in his emotions, not even when he was hitting hard. The separation of behaviors and emotions should belong to a good assassin. A fatal blow under ordinary cover. No, he just graduated, and there is no way he is an assassin. Also, his movements were too bad for him to be one. So, this separation was just his innate talent. King Shuan could only think of this one possibility. What she didn't know was that Han Sen was really poor when he entered God's sanctuary. At the time he offended both King Shuan and Son of Heaven. No one dared to be with him, and no one dared to trade with him. The new graduate started to hunt creatures using an ordinary alloy dagger without any experience. Even just ordinary creatures posed great threats to a beginner, not to mention that they often came in groups, so Han Sen must have taken an individual creature by surprise and killed it. Once surrounded by a group, he could only wait to die. To minimize the danger, he had to ambush and attack. And the most important part was not to alert the creatures, who had more acute senses than men. In the first month, Han Sen was honing these skills. In failure after failure, he learned to hide his emotions and intentions so that the creatures sensed no danger even when he approached. It was like playing dirty, but it was also the only way for him to survive at that point. Later, he had to keep practicing and improve his skills in order to kill primitive creatures, and gradually they became part of his instinct. Although Han Sen's fighting skills were not even close to advanced, he was no worse than a great assassin in his explosiveness and timing. Like an assassin, his skills were also honed between life and death, and the only difference was that it was the creatures instead of men that he killed. He seems to have great strength, speed, and explosiveness, which indicates that he has fairly high geno points, unless he is practicing hyper-geno arts. King Shuan looked at some data, but didn't worry too much about it. Han Sen's data was indeed better than average, but data like this can be seen anywhere in the shelter. It was only a bit unexpected that it belonged to Han Sen. Talented but vulgar and despicable. I'll just teach him a lesson next time, thought King Shuan bitterly. Because of Han Sen's sneak attacks, she labeled him as despicable again. It was indeed hard for most people to imagine that Han Sen had integrated the sneak attack skills into his practice and instinct. The reason why Han Sen could hit Son of Heaven in the face was his sneak attack skills. Or else someone like him could never hit Son of Heaven, who had great geno points and hyper-geno arts. Sneak attack didn't sound good, but it was practical. When he got home, Han Sen had dinner with his mother and Han Yan. The next day, he did not go to God's sanctuary but took the train to a martial hall. Han Sen had only learned basic martial arts in the past, and those were designed for people who had no geno points. As one started to gain geno points in God's sanctuary, one became stronger in general. With the practice of hyper-geno arts, the body had become even more unique, and this difference allowed people like him to practice certain martial arts that normal people could not practice. These martial arts can be learned at martial halls as well as at advanced colleges, and martial masters who worked at martial halls taught these for a living. Unlike in ancient times, these martial masters did not rely on their inherited fame, nor did they want to leave legacies. Their only goal was to make profit. So, the more money a student spent, the better martial arts were taught. Martial arts all had certain requirements for physical conditioning. If the requirements were not met, it wouldn't be possible to practice. In the past, Han Sen had no money and no significant enhancement in his physical conditioning. Now with 13 sacred Geno points and lots of other Geno points, he had become stronger. The practice of jade skin had also helped. Now his physical condition was among the best in his peer group. Ares Martial Hall was famous on Roka Planet. The tuition there was very expensive, but the martial arts taught were very good. The owner of the Martial Hall was a veteran and was famous back in the days when he was serving. After getting severely injured in a battle, he went back to Roka to open Ares Martial Hall. Everyone called the veteran Old Devil. As long as you paid enough, he would teach you anything. And you could indeed learn some really good skills. Fellow, you look like you have a bright future ahead of you. Do you want to sign up for all special classes? All 12 martial arts for only 50 million. Old Devil looked at Han Sen with a greedy smile, like a dragon looking at gold. I would like to sign up for an advanced class to learn Ghost Haunt. Han Sen came here for a reason. His dad had learned from Old Devil and told him Old Devil has a great martial art called Ghost Haunt. Unfortunately, his dad's physical condition hadn't reached the required level for Ghost Haunt, so he couldn't learn it. He always had regretted that and asked Han Sen to learn Ghost Haunt when he grew up. Han Sen also heard from his father that Ghost Haunt was especially effective on women. Han Sen had once again offended Qin Xuan, and it didn't look like she would let it go easily. Not willing to be bullied by her, he thought of his father's words about Old Devil and Ghost Haunt, and wanted to take the opportunity. After all, 1 million was a piece of cake for him right now. Although Ghost Haunt is among the most advanced, its requirements were even higher than those of special classes. You must at least max out on mutant Geno points to stand a chance. How fit are you? Old Devil looked at Han Sen in surprise. No one had chosen Ghost Haunt in a while because of its high entry barrier. While a bit upset about spending his hard-earned money, Han Sen paid for it. Young man, you have great things lined up for you. Come with me. You'll have to memorize Ghost Haunt first. Old Devil showed Han Sen into a screening room, turned on the hologram and left him alone in the room. It was Old Devil himself practicing Ghost Haunt in the hologram. Han Sen looked for a while, and his eyes widened. He thought to himself, wow, so that's what you mean by especially effective on women, Dad. Ghost Haunt should really be called skin to skin, as all movements were aimed at one thing, which was to stick on the opponent. Wrapping, blocking, and winding, all sorts of movements allowed the body to act like a snake to tightly trap the limbs of the opponent, so that there was no way for the opponent to attack. If the opponent was a woman, with the practice of Ghost Haunt, one would be able to feel her up. If it was a normal woman, she would feel overwhelmed in just a few movements. If I were to use Ghost Haunt to fight Qin Xuan, she would consider me even more of a pervert. Han Sen suddenly regretted picking this martial art to learn. However, the tuition was non-refundable. Well, I'll just learn it first and see. Han Sen calmed down and started to carefully watch and memorize Ghost Haunt. With a closer look, Han Sen found that the martial art was not so nasty as it had seemed at first. There were indeed a lot of advanced skills, especially in wrestling and close combat. Many were very practical and could save a life at critical moments. In his room at Steel Armor Shelter, the primitive copper-toothed beast had become a mutant creature. Han Sen decided to let it keep evolving into a sacred blood creature. At the gate of the shelter, the gang of Son of Heaven was gone. It had been half a month since Han Sen left God's sanctuary, so Dollar was never spotted. They weren't very patient, so they just left. In fact, Son of Heaven had been aware that it was useless to guard the gate, as they didn't know what Dollar really looked like. So even if he did walk in front of them, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. Han Sen left the shelter and went into the mountains, ready to find a remote place to hunt. After entering the deep forests, human footprints became scarce. Han Sen summoned his armor when he was alone and went further into the mountains. Han Sen no longer bothered to hunt ordinary creatures. He would just chase them away or ignore them, and was only interested in hunting rare primitive creatures for food. Now Han Sen had maxed out on ordinary Geno points and had over 80 primitive Geno points, so he didn't really need commonly seen primitive creatures. Now what he really needed was mutant and sacred blood Geno points. Han Sen wanted to complete his evolution with all 4 types of Geno points maxed out. It would be really slow if he used only the black crystal to do this. For primitive creatures, I don't even need to do the hunting. The mutant beast soul I got from Qin Xuan was a pet. It should be able to kill some primitive creatures if summoned. Han Sen looked at the beast soul in the shape of a black cat that he got from blackmail. Type of beast soul of mutant three-eyed cat, pet. Han Sen summoned the mutant three-eyed cat, and a little black kitty the size of his palm appeared. It was rubbing at the foot of Han Sen, looking just like a normal pet cat with its tiny body and wide eyes. Could such a little thing kill those creatures? Han Sen picked it up to take a look, not convinced that a cute thing like this possessed great strength. But then he thought, size didn't necessarily matter. Since it was a mutant beast soul, it must be able to hunt primitive creatures. Seeing some primitive triangular scaled beast wandering nearby, he ordered the cat, go kill the triangular scaled beast. The little guy meowed and got up its nerve to streak toward the triangular scaled beast, biting it on the tail. The triangular scaled beast hesitated and looked back at the cat. Throwing up its tail, the triangular scaled beast then whipped the cat away like a basketball. The mutant three-eyed cat screamed and ran behind Han Sen's feet, shivering. She tricked me. No wonder she didn't even blink when she gave me this. It's a useless beast soul. Han Sen stared at the cat hidden behind him with widened eyes. Han Sen tried a few times more, and the cat was indeed of no use, not even able to beat the weakest primitive creature, a copper-toothed beast. Chased around and running, it was not like a mutant beast soul at all. Suddenly, Han Sen thought of the type of beast soul. According to his knowledge, the beast souls that can be summoned to fight on their own were normally either fighters or mounts, while he knew nothing about pet beast souls. What the heck is a pet beast soul? It's not just for fun, right? I was really tricked by King Xuan. What am I going to do with it? Han Sen's heart sank, and he killed the copper-toothed beast that was chasing the cat. When he was about to take the cat back, it started to meow around the body of the copper-toothed beast with its mouth watering. Go ahead. Han Sen looked at the mutant three-eyed cat curiously. Normal fighter beast souls and mount beast souls didn't have to eat, and they could just recover in a vacuum once injured. Receiving the approval from Han Sen, the cat rushed to the corpse and started gnawing, but it was clear that its teeth and claws were not sharp enough to break down the skin. Depressed, Han Sen peeled the skin off, sliced the meat with a dagger and fed it to the cat. And this little thing sure could eat. The copper-toothed beast was at least twice its size and it managed to eat all the flesh. Lying on the ground with a full belly, the cat could barely move and Han Sen was almost worried about it. Helplessly shaking his head, Han Sen took the cat back and decided to research the use of a pet beast soul on Skynet when he got back home. Mutant creatures were not so easy to find. Han Sen had been in the mountains for more than half a month and did not encounter any mutant creatures. He did find quite a few primitive creatures new to him and now had more than 90 primitive geno points. Hunting alone in the mountains was quite boring, so Han Sen would summon the cat to play with and feed for fun when he was resting. The protection from the black beetle armor allowed him to practice ghost hunt even when hunting primitive creatures. Although he was still not skilled at it, he noticed the strengths of this martial art, especially in wrestling. It was very easy to use and would incapacitate the creatures in a short time. However, close combat can be dangerous, and there were a few times when he used the wrong movement and could have been killed by the creatures. For over a month in the mountains, he had not found a single mutant creature, while he made a lot of progress in using ghost hunt. Later, Han Sen no longer needed to rely on his armor when hunting primitive creatures. One of his biggest gains was that he finally maxed out on primitive geno points. Thinking of the fact that he was struggling for ordinary geno points just a few months ago, he was suddenly in a great mood and started to make a fire and barbecue some meat. Help, help. Han Sen was sharing the barbecue with the mutant three-eyed cat he named Meowth when he saw a guy in ragged clothes running toward him, crying for help. He quickly got up and looked over there. With just one look, Han Sen abandoned the meat on the ground, took back Meowth and started to run. "Buddy, please help me. I'll give you money, however much you want," cried the man while running. "You can keep your money." Han Sen did not turn his head and ran desperately. You first needed to be alive to spend money, and there were at least 100 Momo beasts chasing him. Although Momo beasts were only primitive creatures, they each weighed more than a dozen tons and had the toughest skin. If hit or trampled by one, his internal organs would probably be shattered even with his armor on. Not to mention there were so many of them. Even if King Xuan, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy were all here, they'd have run under such circumstances. "Buddy, not so fast. Give me a hand and I will thank you." Behind Han Sen, the man was out of breath. "I'm in danger as well. Just pray." After running for a while, Han Sen saw a cliff ahead of him with green vines hanging, grabbed a vine and started climbing up. The benefits of the gained geno points and practice of ghost hunt were showing. Han Sen was in the air with just a bit of climbing and jumped on a large stone platform extending from the cliff. Seeing Han Sen climbing up, the man also ran over and wanted to follow him. The man was either too weak or too tired, so he slipped down after a few tries. "Buddy, help." With the mammal beast less than 30 feet from him, the man was about to cry out. "Hang on." Han-sen grabbed the vine the man was holding onto and started pulling hard. Overjoyed, the man climbed with all fours, leveraging Han-sen's strength. When he was 30 feet from the ground, he heard mammal beasts running into the cliff. Han-sen and the man felt as if even the mountains were trembling. With pulling and climbing, the man was finally on the platform. Once on the platform, the man lied down as if he were paralyzed, while breathing heavily, unable to speak. "Friend, what on earth did you do to them?" Han-sen looked down at the mammal beasts running into one another. They wouldn't even leave after they got up, roaring at the platform. But they couldn't climb up as they were even bulkier than elephants. "Do not mention it. Worst luck ever." The man calmed down, fished out a packet of cigarettes from his pocket, lit one and offered one to Han-sen. "You saved my life and I, Lin Beifeng, will always remember. I will show my gratitude after returning to the shelter. Best with cash." Han-sen looked at the cigarette and knew the man must be rich. A packet of Schwarzwald cigarettes cost more than 10,000, and there was no need to be modest with such a wealthy guy. "Buddy, what's your name?" Lin Beifeng threw a lighter at Han-sen. "Han-sen." Han-sen caught the lighter and lit the cigarette. Made from the tobacco produced from Schwarzwald, the cigarettes were harmless to the body and especially refreshing. For those who were risking their lives in God's sanctuary, the Schwarzwald cigarettes were definitely heaven sent. "Sen, trust me, when we are back at the shelter, you can have as much money as you want. Problems that can be solved by money are no problems for me." They chatted for a while, and Han-sen understood what had happened. Lin Beifeng was not only rich, but super rich. He was also lucky to be assigned to a shelter where he had very close acquaintances. So he bought a whole lot of mutant beast souls, armor, weapons, mounts, fighters, etc. He also hired a group of people to hunt with him, wanting to hunt a sacred blood creature. With his great luck, they indeed caught a sacred blood creature, but what happened after was not so lucky. The people he hired either died or escaped, and he just went running into the mountains. After all sorts of danger, he had managed to survive, but lost almost all the beast souls he bought. If it was not for Han-sen, he would have been killed by the mammal beasts. "Sen, how far is our glory shelter from here?" asked Lin Beifeng. "It's your glory shelter." Han-sen laughed. Lin Beifeng was shocked. "Sen, are you joking? I came from Steel Armor Shelter, and it takes 2 weeks to return there. That's #T. I'm really in the range of another shelter." Lin Beifeng was very depressed. He had friends in Glory Shelter, and it was easy for him to buy flesh and beast souls. But it was likely that no one knew him at a different shelter, so even with money it would be hard to buy advanced flesh and beast souls. "Hey, what did you do to the mammal beasts? They are being so persistent." Han-sen looked down again and the mammal beasts were still there, roaring and standing on their hind legs, trying to climb onto the stone platform. I was walking and got hungry, so I saw a young mammal beast grazing," and said Lin Beifeng bitterly. "It was unfortunate. It seems that we are trapped here for some time, so before they leave, let's be nice to each other." Han-sen laughed. "Right, let's do that." Lin Beifeng smiled agreeably and approached Han-sen. "Sen, I'm so thirsty. Can I drink from your water bag?" 10,000 per cup, Han-sen said, narrowing his eyes. "That's #T. What happened to being nice?" cried Lin Beifeng. "You are paying, I'm selling. Isn't that nice? But your water is too expensive. It is even more expensive than water from planet Snowspring. And 10,000 can buy a few bottles of that. It can't be water from planet Snowspring that you have." Lin Beifeng glanced at Han-sen's water bag and said, "Although this is only water from a pool, we do not know how long we'll be trapped here. Water is life at this point, and we'll die within a week without water. And you think it's not worth it?" Han-sen smiled. "It's worth it. But my wallet was lost on the way. Could you give it to me on credit and I'll pay you double when we arrive at the shelter?" Lin Beifeng said. "We don't know each other, and you still owe me the life-saving fee. And now you want to get water on credit. You are making this so hard for me." Han-sen looked indecisive. "Triple, no, quadruple, deal." Han-sen took out his own cup and poured Lin Beifeng a cup of water. Lin Beifeng drank the water in a gulp and gave the empty cup back 3 times for more water. "That's it for today. I don't have much water and need to save. We still don't know when the mammal beasts will leave." Han-sen put the water bag away when Lin Beifeng asked the 4th time. "Sen, you are so strong, so brave and so impressive that you are able to hunt alone deep in the mountains. What do you want?" Han-sen rolled his eyes. Lin Beifeng approached Han-sen and said, "Sen, my beast soul was completely destroyed on the way here. Now I feel so insecure with no beast soul on me. Do you have extra beast souls to sell?" Speaking of beast souls, Han-sen had killed quite a few primitive beasts in recent days and had gained no beast soul. He might have used up his luck on the 2 sacred blood beast souls he got. No beast soul. Would you like some primitive meat jerky? Yes, of course. 10,000 per piece. Sen, this is such a small piece. Trapped on the stone platform for 8 days, they still didn't feel like the mammo beasts would ever leave. We cannot wait any longer. We must find a way out, Han Sen told Lin Beifeng solemnly. We still have some food and water. Let's wait. And maybe the herd is about to retreat. Lin Beifeng had a lingering fear about the mammo beasts. We still have water and food, as well as physical strength. When we have used up everything, we would stand no chance, Han Sen said. But how is it even possible with such a herd? Lin Beifeng said bitterly. So we will have to climb up. Han Sen pointed to the cliff above. Lin Beifeng looked at the cliff standing straight into the clouds and suddenly shuddered. Are we capable of doing this? We have to. It beats waiting to die, and we don't have to climb over. If we could climb up a bit and find somewhere to stand, we could just walk around and go down on the other side of the cliff, Han Sen said. Sen, I agree, Lin Beifeng quickly said. Great. We will start to climb now using the vines. Han Sen grabbed a vine, made sure it was tough enough and began climbing. Sen, you are so fit. You must have maxed out on mutant geno points. Lin Beifeng stopped climbing as he felt his arms hurting too much, while Han Sen was still climbing briskly. Hang in there. There is a rock sticking out up there, and we can go there and rest. Han Sen looked down at Lin Beifeng. Sen, I can't. Shall we just go back down? You stay here. I will go up first and then pull you up with the vine. Han Sen started to climb with all fours, and he was so fast it looked like he was walking on the ground, which stunned Lin Beifeng. It took a little while for Han Sen to reach the rock and use the vine to pull Lin Beifeng up. I'll climb up to the rock above and have a look. If there is no way out, I'll just go down to eat and drink. Maybe we could outrun the mammo beasts, Han Sen decided, and kept climbing. The stone was farther and larger than Han Sen had imagined. It was half the size of a basketball court. When he got on the stone, Han Sen's eyes suddenly widened. On the stone was a nest made with tree limbs and vines. It looked like a huge swallow's nest, almost taking up a better half of the stone. An egg at least 3 feet tall lay in the nest. Wow, such a big egg. How big would the creature that laid it be? Han Sen shuddered. The creature was not here now, but he dared not think what would happen if it came back. If the egg belonged to a sacred blood creature, Han Sen would not want to miss it. After some hesitation, Han Sen approached the egg and cut a hole in the egg shell with the tip of his dagger. Fishing out a straw from his pocket, he stuck it in the hole and started sucking. Suddenly, the sweet juice filled Han Sen's mouth. Sacred blood creature Stormbird's egg eaten. No sacred geno point gained. Although no sacred blood geno point was gained, the fact that the egg was indeed a sacred blood creature left Han Sen in joy. It was such a huge egg, with at most only 10 sacred geno points, that he was not surprised that he hadn't gained a point with just a mouthful. And he already had some sacred geno points and couldn't have all 10 points, so he could only get 6 or 7 if he was lucky. But sacred geno points were so hard to get that even just a few more would help. Han Sen was desperately sucking the liquid with the straw that he used to drink from his water bag when he was hiding from the creatures that he didn't have to move. It was unexpectedly handy as well for sucking the egg juice. The egg was so big that when Han Sen finally heard the cue that he was gaining 1 sacred geno point, he was so full that he could drink no more. Han Sen pulled out the straw, and then sealed the hole with mud. Putting the straw back, he descended using the vine. Sen, what took you so long? Is there a way out? Seeing Han Sen coming from above, Lin Beifeng, who had been worried sick, asked immediately in a low voice so as not to alert the mammo beasts below. No, it is as steep as a mirror, and we have nowhere to go. Han Sen shook his head. Then we have no option but to wait for the herd to leave, Lin Beifeng said disappointedly. It's all right. We still have some food and water left. Han Sen was really taking his time now as he couldn't finish drinking the raw egg anytime soon, and he wouldn't leave before that. They huddled on the stone to spend the night, and the next morning Han Sen climbed up to eat more egg. He made sure there was no creature in the nest before he went up and broke the seal to drink from the egg. Sen, why are you climbing up again? Lin Beifeng wondered when Han Sen came down. There are sacred blood creatures above, and I was having a feast up there. Do you want to go together? Han Sen laughed. You can keep it. Lin Beifeng glanced at him and didn't believe a word he said. Even if there really were sacred blood creatures, Han Sen was more likely to be their food. Han Sen happily returned to his room and was teleported out of God's sanctuary. Before he left the station, a slim figure blocked his way. Station master. Such a coincidence. Han Sen groaned inwardly. He had totally forgot about his discord with Qin Xuan. Come with me, Qin Xuan said coldly, walking toward the combat room. She was upset that Han Sen had been able to hit her last time and wanted to kick his ass before she could let it go. I'll just fight her. She's just a woman after all, Han Sen whispered to himself. Han Sen knew that Qin Xuan would not leave him alone no matter how he restrained himself, so he would no longer do that. He had almost mastered Ghost Haunt, and it would be great for him to practice it on her. When Han Sen stood in front of Qin Xuan in a combat suit, she didn't spare any effort and kicked him with a leg sweep. For Han Sen, who was good at sneak attacks, as long as he had no chance to sneak up, he was doomed to lose. Hence Qin Xuan hit first and didn't give Han Sen any chance. But she had still committed a great mistake. She still didn't take Han Sen seriously enough, and did not regard him as an opponent. All she wanted to do was to kick his ass. That's why she didn't use even half her strength. In her mind, he was still the ignorant ass freak, a rookie who could be bullied by anyone in the shelter. Qin Xuan did not really want to harm Han Sen, so she wasn't hitting hard. But what she didn't know was that Han Sen now had 18 sacred Geno points and was practicing Jade Skin. Although not as fit as her, the gap between them was not so big either. Seeing her leg sweep, Han Sen moved to a spot where Qin Xuan couldn't reach and twisted her leg with his arms. She immediately lost balance and fell to the ground. Han Sen immediately pressed himself against her and locked her limbs down. Qin Xuan hadn't expected such nifty moves from him, and when she realized her mistake, she was trapped and couldn't wriggle free. Feeling anger and shame, she struggled and failed because of the clever techniques of Ghost Haunt. If she struggled with all her strength, her arms would be dislocated or even broken. Trapped by Han Sen, she blushed and still couldn't believe Han Sen had taken her with the first move. She wanted to teach him a lesson, and everything went wrong. Station Master, did I win? Han Sen was secretly pleased. I did not expect old devil's teaching to work. I even beat Qin Xuan. You will never win. Qin Xuan raged and refused to throw in the towel. If it was anyone else, it might be fine. But for this despicable-ass freak, she would not bow her head. Qin Xuan roared and shapeshifted into a golden lion taller than a man. Han Sen was thrown off her instantaneously, and the lion swooped down at him. Foul, we have agreed not to use any beast souls, Han Sen quickly shouted. Qin Xuan paused as her lion paw was about to hit him. She did promise last time that she wouldn't use beast souls, but under the circumstances, she had completely forgotten about it. Alright, no beast souls. Qin Xuan secretly blushed, took back her beast soul and launched an attack with her fist. Han Sen still hadn't completely mastered Ghost Haunt, and his fitness and experience fell short compared to Qin Xuan. Although he resisted over 20 movements from her, he was still beat. Qin Xuan did not say anything and turned away. In fact, she felt ashamed because if she hadn't used her beast soul, she couldn't have gotten rid of Han Sen. So, she had already lost at that moment. I'm still not strong enough. My Geno points and fighting skills were not even close to hers. Han Sen knew that he couldn't have caught up with the best in steel armor shelter in such a short amount of time. While he was still a little disappointed that he couldn't even take 30 movements from her. Qin Xuan was still blushing after a shower. She was truly abashed that she was put in such a tough situation by ass freak. Something is wrong. Although his wrestling skills were not bad, he couldn't have locked me down without great fitness. How did he gain so many Geno points? Thought Qin Xuan suddenly. She quickly called out the data collected in Han Sen's combat suit. Qin Xuan clenched her lips and cursed bitterly. That bastard. He must have maxed out on his mutant Geno points already. He was just playing weak to make me underestimate him. Ass freak, I'll never make peace with you. From then on, every time Han Sen passed the teleport station, Qin Xuan would always call him into the combat room. Han Sen was glad to oblige. Wrestling skills such as Ghost Haunt really need much practice, and with a training partner as good as Qin Xuan, he could not really hone his techniques. Some pain was nothing compared to his gain. If it was not for Qin Xuan, Han Sen could only practice when risking his life, which was far more dangerous than his fights with her. Of course, Han Sen was careful so that she didn't notice he was using her. Each time he would get on her nerves on purpose so that she would keep calling him to the combat room. Qin Xuan picked on Han Sen many times but still didn't get over it. Every time she saw his smiling face, she would get mad and have an urge to beat him up. It almost became a habit of hers. The copper-toothed beast fed by Han Sen had become purple in color and bigger in size 2 months after it had become a mutant creature. Whether I could keep rising in the world all depends on you. Please become a sacred creature soon. Han Sen looked at the purple color of its skin and thought it was about time. Judging from the situation, it would take about 3 months for a mutant creature to evolve into a sacred blood creature. This period was neither too long nor too short. It was almost impossible for most people to hunt a sacred blood creature in just 3 months. Even King Xuan might not have been able to hunt a sacred blood creature for a year. Now with this black crystal, Han Sen could have an entire sacred blood creature to his own every 3 months, which was simply incredible. Just give me enough time, and I could easily evolve with all 4 types of Geno points maxed out. By then I will gain the title of Sacred Blood Aristocrat for sure. Han Sen was getting excited. He did not see King Xuan at the teleport station on his way home. She could be either tired of this game or simply busy. Outside the station, he saw a girl standing at the roadside and stopped walking. It was Zhu Zai, the girl who grew up with Zhang Denfang and him. Zhu Zai was from a single-parent family, and her mother had raised her by working at Han Sen's father's company. With no one to babysit her, her mother had often brought her to work, and she had always played with Zhang Denfang and Han Sen. Later, Han Sen heard that Zhu Zai's father was still alive and found her mother and her. After his dad's incident, Han Sen didn't have the energy to learn more about her family. But he did hear that she was an illegitimate daughter and her father only took her back after his wife passed away. Sen, Zhu Zai also saw Han Sen and exclaimed, "Why are you here?" asked Han Sen, puzzled. "Sen, I'm over 16 and can enter God's sanctuary now," Zhu Zai chuckled and said. "So fast?" Han Sen was startled. In his mind, Zhu Zai was a little girl, and now she could even enter God's sanctuary. "I'm only a few months younger than you. Don't think of me as a child," Zhu Zai said discontentedly. Indeed, how time flies. Han Sen looked at her well-developed body and smiled. She was no longer a little girl. Zhu Zai blushed as Han Sen looked at her. When she was about to say something, there was a roar of an engine, and they saw a well-dressed young man coming down from a private aircraft parked on the roadside. The young man was about 20 years old, and that private aircraft alone was worth more than 10 million. "Sister, I said earlier to use our private teleport equipment. It's just inevitable that we should meet some annoying people at a teleport station." The young people did not even look at Han Sen and went straight to Zhu Zai. "Brother, he is my childhood friend," Zhu Zai quickly explained. "Well, we should go back." The young man ignored her explanation, took her hand and led her on the aircraft. "Sen, I'll come back," Zhu Zai said to Han Sen softly before she went. The young people returned to warn Han Sen. "People like you aren't worthy to be her friend. Leave her alone or you'll be sorry." "Are you talking to me?" Han Sen glanced at him. "You don't believe what I said." The young man suddenly stepped forward and quickly hit Han Sen's lower abdomen with a knee. He was very close to Han Sen, and he was incredibly fast. His knee suddenly came toward Han Sen. Han Sen looked calm, but secretly sneered. "Nothing is better for wrestling than Ghost Haunt. Even King Xuan dares not let me get close now." Leaning to one side, Han Sen avoided his knee and stuck a leg behind his leg on the ground. Han Sen also clamped the young man's neck and pulled hard. Bang! The young man suddenly lost his balance and fell to the floor. Lying on the ground, he looked at Han Sen in shock and forgot to get up. He didn't expect his hit would be in vain, and couldn't believe he was pulled down by Han Sen. "Sen, what happened?" Seeing things going wrong, Zhu Zai ran down from the aircraft and quickly helped the young man up. "Nothing, just a ritual between men. It is late and I need to go. Let's eat together sometime." Han Sen smiled, waved goodbye and went to the train station. "Brother, you all right?" Zhu Zai asked the young man. "Interesting, really interesting." The young man watched Han Sen leaving with a strange smile. Seeing the young man smiling, Zhu Zai was suddenly anxious. "Brother, don't pick on him. He didn't mean it. He could make me fall even when he didn't mean it. If he meant it, then would I, Fang Jinky, be killed?" he said with his eyes narrowed. "Brother, that's not what I meant." Zhu Zai panicked and did not know how to explain. "No worries, sister." As he said, "It was a ritual between men and I shall return the favor." Fang Jinky stared frantically in the direction where Han Sen went. "In a few days, please invite him to dinner at home." "What?" Zhu Zai looked at Fang Jinky and could not believe her own ears. Han Sen didn't go far to hunt these days. He was on his own, so unless he went somewhere no one would go, it wasn't likely he could find mutant or sacred blood creatures before the gangs of King Xuan, Son of Heaven or Fist Guy did. Han Sen went on the Skynet and logged into a forum called Polar Night whose members were people from different planets currently struggling in God's sanctuary. Here, people from the same shelter could exchange information and needs. Although the Alliance had a similar official site, it was much easier for people to go on Polar Night because all you needed was a username. On the official site, you'd need to register with your real identity. Not wanting anyone to know his identity, Han Sen went to the section of steel armor shelter, where there were a lot of posts, roughly a 1,000 or more per day. He went through the postings, most of which were buying or selling information, and then there was some recruiting information. For example, the rich would spend money to hire some people from the same shelter to protect or help the child. Recently, Hansen's luck had been poor. Not only couldn't he find any mutual creatures or sacred blood creatures, he also failed to gain any beast souls. So, he decided to work for money. Hansen browsed for a while and saw a job posting that paid well. He was surprised to see it was Lin Beifeng who posted it. Hansen hadn't seen him since the last time they met. It was unexpected that he had also posted in Steel Armor Shelter. Lin Beifeng was not only recruiting good men, but also making offers for beast souls and mutant creature flesh. He wanted all the good things and was willing to pay for them. People who answered his thread were mainly just onlookers. After all, the demands for mutant creature flesh and beast souls were so high that no one would sell easily. Hansen browsed a while and turned to other threads, and soon he found a satisfactory job. There were several young people who had just entered God's sanctuary hiring a skilled hunter to help them kill primitive creatures. The requirement was to be able to deal with 10 primitive creatures and protect them at the same time, alone. In a word, this was a babysitting job, watching these rookies fight primitive creatures and save them when they encountered danger. This job was not difficult, but quite troublesome. Generally speaking, the experienced would not take such a job. But these young men were paying well, 10,000 to protect them each day, and one contract was for at least half a month. Hansen sent a text message to the number they had left and didn't leave voicemail or send an image of himself. He didn't want his personal information to leak out, and that was why he had chosen Polar Night. He could have gone to the official site, where everything was regulated and protected by law, but he would need to sign the contract with his real identity. After a while, he received a reply, which said they had to see how well he could fight before deciding to hire him. Hansen had no problem with that and agreed to meet at a certain time and place in Steel Armor Shelter. After agreeing to meet, Hansen did not close the window but continued to browse the trading section. After his bronze crescent spear was destroyed, he had wanted to hunt himself a weapon beast soul, but he had had no luck with a beast soul at all. Hansen wasn't trying to buy a weapon beast soul but a man-made alloy bow and arrow. Alpha alloy weapons could now easily kill primitive beasts, but not mutant creatures. They were not cheap either, and normally even more expensive than primitive beast souls. Hansen could use most of the weapons, but he had worked hard on archery since he had planned to hunt alone at a distance before he entered God's sanctuary. But he overlooked something. He couldn't afford any good bow and arrows, and without those, he couldn't even pierce the skin of any creature. Now he had earned some money and it would be possible for him to purchase an alloy bow and arrows, and he wanted to start hunting with archery. It was, after all, both a safe and powerful way of hunting. The most important thing was that, in God's sanctuary, only the one who launched the last hit had the chance to gain the beast soul, and archery must be among the top 3 methods when it came to the potential windfall. Archery required special training, so most people preferred swords and knives. There weren't many posts about selling a bow and arrows. Hansen was trying to save money, so he wanted to buy some second-hand goods. The alpha alloy bows all cost more than $1 million, which was too expensive for him. The silver lining was that due to the unpopularity of archery, there were not many competing buyers either. Hansen noticed a post from 7 days ago written by someone who was about to go to the second God's sanctuary and planned to sell all his belongings. All the stuff was sold except for an alloy bow and 6 alloy arrows, a bow from the Black Vader series and arrows from the Saber series. Hansen had practiced archery for a while and carefully studied all types of bows and arrows. To make weapons, the alloy didn't necessarily need to be the stiffest, because if it was too stiff, the edge could chip. However, stiff alloy didn't wear out easily. Bows and arrows were no exceptions. There were 3 types alloy used in a Black Vader bow. 2 were mixed to make the bow itself in order to guarantee its flexibility and stiffness at the same time. And the alloy used in making the string was even more special, its manufacturing methods monopolized by a few interstellar metal production companies. The Black Vader series was a classic series of alloy bows, and the prices were overwhelming. The cheapest one, Wanderer's Bow, cost $2 million, with no arrows or quiver included in the price. Hansen played with his new bow, Doomsday, for quite a while and fell in love with it. When it was almost time for him to meet his young clients, Hansen took his bow and arrows and entered God's sanctuary. When he arrived where they were supposed to meet, he saw dozens of people surrounding several young men in biological armor and realized that he wasn't the only candidate. Walking around to earn 10,000 easy dollars per day seemed to be a great deal for many. After all, a primitive creature was only worth several hundred, and it also took energy to hunt and move the dead creature around. Han Sen frowned at the crowd and was ready to turn away. He just wanted to find an easy job to earn some money. With such competition, he'd rather look for another job. When he was ready to leave, Han Hao and a few people came together. It looked like they were also coming for the young men. Well, as Freak himself here, looking sharp with the bow and arrows. Did you come to protect the masters as well? The young man next to Han Hao ridiculed him with a tone of exaggeration. His remark got the attention of the crowd, as Freak was well known in steel armor shelter. People suddenly started to heckle Han Sen. Freak, who do you think you are? Freak, can you even beat the original creatures? It's more likely that the young masters will need to protect him. That will be all for now. I hope you find this story interesting. Leave a like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you won't miss the next part of this story. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.